The notification lit up the marble countertop of the kitchen island, slicing through the darkness of the Chicago penthouse like a warning flare. Daniel stared at the screen, reading the words from his wife that were framed as a request, but felt like an ultimatum. Meeting my first love alone. Be mature about it. It was the moment the silence in their marriage finally became louder than the lies they had been telling themselves for years. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet, devastating moments where love turns into a psychological war, stay with me. There are secrets behind these closed doors that we have yet to uncover. The silence in the penthouse was usually something Daniel Vance paid a premium for. On the 42nd floor, high above the slush and grind of Chicago's winter traffic, the world was supposed to feel distant and manageable. But tonight, the silence felt pressurized, like the air in a submarine taking on water. Daniel stood by the kitchen island, a slab of Carrara marble that cost more than his father's first car. A tumbler of Japanese whiskey sat untouched near his right hand. His phone lay in the center of the white expanse, screen dark now, but the message was burned into his retinas. Meeting Julian for a drink. Just for closure. Meeting my first love alone. Be mature about it. Don't wait up. He hadn't thrown the phone. He hadn't called her screaming. He had done exactly what she asked. He had been mature. Daniel picked up the glass, the ice clinking softly, a lonely sound in the cavernous, open-plan living room. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city was a grid of amber and white lights, blurred by the wet snow streaking against the glass. Mature, he whispered to the reflection of the room behind him. It was Elena's favorite word. It was the weapon she had used to carve away parts of him for 5 years. When she didn't want to visit his parents? We need to be mature about boundaries, Daniel. When she spent their savings on an impulsive trip to Bali with her girlfriends? Be mature about my need for self-discovery. And now, Julian. Julian, the painter. The tortured soul she had dated in her 20s. The one who broke her heart. The one she had wept over on their second date, confessing that she had never felt a fire like that again. Daniel was the architect, the structure, the safety, the foundation. Julian was the arsonist. The elevator chimed in the foyer. Daniel didn't turn around. He took a slow sip of the whiskey, letting the burn settle in his chest. He heard the rustle of a coat, the click of heels on the hardwood, and then the heavy sigh that always signaled she was home and expected the world to pivot toward her mood. God, it is freezing out there. Elena's voice floated toward him. It was light, airy, carrying a forced casualness that made Daniel's grip on the glass tighten. He turned slowly. Elena was unwinding a cashmere scarf from her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, or the wine, or the man she had just left. She looked beautiful in that effortless, art gallery chic way she had mastered. But there was something else. Her lipstick was slightly worn off. "You're up," she said, pausing as she saw him. Her eyes darted to the whiskey, then to his face. "I told you not to wait up." "I was working," Daniel lied. His voice was steady, calm, the voice of a reasonable man. Elena walked over, bringing the scent of the city with her. Cold air, expensive perfume, and beneath it, the faint, acrid cling of clove cigarettes. Elena didn't smoke. Julian did. It was intense, she said, leaning against the counter, testing the waters. She was waiting for him to ask. She was waiting for him to get jealous, so she could call him insecure. It was a dance they had done 100 times. Intense? Daniel asked, his face a mask of polite interest. Just emotional. He's going through a lot. He needed someone who understands his history. She looked at Daniel, her eyes wide and challenging. Thank you for not making this a thing, Daniel. Seriously. It means a lot that we're at a place where I can do this, where we can be adults. She reached out and touched his forearm. Her hand was cold. Daniel looked down at her hand. A month ago, he would have covered it with his own. He would have reassured her. He would have swallowed the acid in his throat and told her he trusted her, because that's what good husbands do. But tonight, looking at the smudge of lipstick on her chin that she hadn't noticed, something inside the architect finally collapsed. It wasn't a loud crash. It was a structural failure deep in the foundation, invisible from the outside, but total. He pulled his arm away gently, as if reaching for the bottle to pour another drink. I'm glad you got what you needed, Daniel said. He poured the amber liquid, listening to the glug, glug, glug sound filling the silence. He looked up and offered her a tight, thin smile, the kind you give a stranger in an elevator. Did you get your closure? Elena blinked, slightly thrown by his detachment. I think so. Yes. Good, Daniel said, lifting his glass in a mock toast. Then we never have to talk about him again. He downed the drink in one swallow, the heat searing his throat. He knew he was lying. He knew this wasn't the end. And for the first time in their marriage, Daniel Vance wasn't planning on fixing the crack in the wall. He was going to let the whole house come down. I'm going to bed, he said, walking past her without a kiss. I have an early meeting. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of clove smoke lingering in the air between them. The morning light in the Vance penthouse was unforgiving. It flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the stainless steel appliances and the polished granite, bleaching the color out of everything. It was the kind of brightness that made it impossible to hide the fatigue under one's eyes, or the secrets lingering in the air. Daniel stood by the espresso machine, watching the dark liquid stream into his cup. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night on the far edge of the king-sized bed, listening to Elena's breathing. It had been too rhythmic, too peaceful for someone who had allegedly just reopened a deep emotional wound with an ex-lover. Behind him, he heard the soft pad of bare feet. Coffee? Elena asked. Her voice was bright, too bright for a Wednesday morning. Daniel turned. She was wearing his oversized dress shirt, the top buttons undone. It was a look that usually signaled an attempt at intimacy, a playful claim on him. Today, it felt like a costume. It's brewing, Daniel said, sliding a mug across the island toward her. Elena climbed onto one of the high stools, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. She looked refreshed, glowing even. There was a vibrating energy about her, the kind of manic enthusiasm she usually reserved for a new gallery acquisition. I feel so much lighter today, she said, looking into the steam rising from her cup. I didn't realize how much guilt I was carrying about Julian until last night. Just sitting there, talking it out, it was cathartic. Truly. Daniel took a sip of his coffee. It was bitter. He had forgotten the sugar. So, he's doing well? Oh, God, no, Elena laughed, a throaty sound that grated on Daniel's nerves. He's a mess. The art world eats people like him alive, Daniel. He's too raw, too sensitive. He's been in and out of depressive episodes. Honestly, I think I was the only stable thing he had for years. He just needed to know that I didn't hate him. She paused, looking up at Daniel with wide, earnest eyes. This was her superpower, the ability to weaponize empathy. She made herself the saint, the healer. He asked about you, by the way, she added. Daniel's grip on his mug tightened. Did he? Mm-hmm. He respects you. He thinks it's amazing that I found someone so grounded. I told him that's why we work. Because you're secure enough to let me be me. She reached out, grazing Daniel's wrist with her fingertips. Most men would have thrown a fit about last night. But you get it. You understand that love isn't about possession. It's about trust. There it was, the trap. She was praising him for his compliance, reinforcing the behavior she wanted. If he objected now, he wouldn't just be an angry husband. He would be a disappointment. He would be most men. Daniel looked down at her hand. He noticed her phone sitting face down on the counter next to her elbow. It buzzed, a short, sharp vibration against the marble. Elena's hand flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a reflex she tried to suppress instantly, but Daniel saw it. She didn't flip the phone over. She didn't check the notification. She casually moved her elbow to cover it. I'm glad I could help, Daniel said, his voice flat. Does this mean the closure is closed? You've healed him? Elena hesitated. She took a long sip of coffee, buying time. Well, closure isn't a one-time event, is it? It's a process. He asked if I could look at some of his new sketches. Strictly professional, of course. He trusts my eye. I told him I'd think about it. She looked at Daniel, gauging his reaction, waiting for the crack in his armor. But only if you're okay with it. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Be mature, her eyes said. Don't be small. Daniel felt a cold nausea rising in his stomach. She was setting up the next meeting before the scent of the first one had even faded from her skin. He thought about the clove cigarette smell on her coat last night. He thought about the smudge of lipstick. He set his mug down with a deliberate clink. You should do whatever you feel is right, Elena, Daniel said. He checked his watch, though he didn't register the time. I have to go. Site visit in the West Loop. You're leaving already? She sounded disappointed, but her eyes were already drifting back to her covered phone. Yes. Big day. Daniel grabbed his coat and briefcase. He walked to the door without kissing her goodbye. As he stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the garage, the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of his wife sitting in his shirt, finally flipping her phone over to smile at the screen. In the silence of the descending elevator, Daniel didn't scream. He didn't punch the wall. He simply pulled out his own phone and opened his calendar. He found the date for the upcoming weekend, their anniversary dinner reservation. He stared at it for a moment, then hit delete. The one-time meeting for closure metastasized into a Tuesday and Thursday ritual. It happened slowly, framed with the plausible deniability of crisis management. Julian wasn't just an ex anymore. He was a project. He was fragile. He was manic. He was on the verge of a breakthrough or a breakdown, and according to Elena, she was the only person in Chicago capable of steering him away from the edge. Daniel watched the transformation of his wife with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. She was brighter, sharper. She bought new clothes, silk blouses that dipped lower, heels that clicked louder, claiming they were for the gallery, though the gallery's foot traffic hadn't changed in months. The erosion of their marriage didn't happen with shouting matches. It happened in the quiet moments they used to share. It was a Thursday evening in late February. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, rattling the windows of the sleek Audi SUV as Daniel pulled it into the garage. His own car was in the shop, a cracked windshield from the highway debris, so he had taken Elena's for the day. He put the car in park, but didn't kill the engine immediately. The dashboard touchscreen was still glowing. Because he had used her car, his phone hadn't automatically connected. Elena's phone, however, must have been the last device synced. As the engine idled, the infotainment system tried to resume the last active session from Spotify. The screen flickered. A playlist title scrolled across the display: Muse, Midnight. Daniel stared at it. He didn't recognize the title. He reached out, his finger hovering over the dial, and scrolled through the track list. His breath hitched in his throat. There were songs there that he knew. Fade Into You, By Your Side. And then track number 4, The Night We Met. It was the song they had played for their first dance. It was the song Elena had insisted on, crying into his shoulder at the reception, telling him that the lyrics spoke to her soul, that he was the only one who had ever really seen her. Now, it was nestled in a playlist created 2 days ago, sandwiched between moody indie tracks that smelled of clove cigarettes and paint thinner. Daniel turned the volume knob. The haunting melody filled the leather interior of the car. It sounded different now. It sounded like a theft. She had taken their memory, sanitized it, and gifted it to Julian. It was a betrayal far more intimate than sex. It was the recycling of their soul. He killed the engine, cutting the song off mid-note. The silence that rushed back into the car was deafening. Upstairs, the apartment was warm, smelling of roasted chicken. A domestic tableau. Elena was at the kitchen island, chopping vegetables. Her phone was propped up against a bottle of wine, the screen alive with incoming text bubbles. "Hey," she said without looking up, her knife rhythmically hitting the cutting board. "You're late. I almost started without you." "Traffic," Daniel said. He hung his coat up, feeling the weight of the car ride still pressing on his chest. "How was your day?" "Busy. Exhausting, actually." She paused to sip her wine, her eyes darting to the phone screen. She smiled, a small, private smile that she quickly swallowed when she realized he might be looking. "Julian came by the gallery. He's having trouble with the lighting for his show. He's so particular." "I drove your car today," Daniel said, walking to the fridge. He didn't look at her. "Oh? How was it?" "Fine. The Bluetooth is finicky." Elena stopped chopping. The rhythm ceased. Did it play anything?" "Just the radio," Daniel lied. He pulled a sparkling water from the fridge and turned to face her. Relief washed over her face, subtle but undeniable. "Oh, good. I listened to some weird podcasts. Didn't want to bore you." She was lying so easily now. It was reflex. They sat down to dinner, the roasted chicken perfectly cooked, the wine expensive. But the space between them at the table felt vast, like a canyon widening with every silent second. Elena kept her phone next to her plate, face down. Every few minutes it would vibrate against the wood. Psst. Each time her eyes would flicker to it, then back to Daniel. her conversation, stuttering. "Check it," Daniel said finally, cutting a piece of chicken. "It might be an emergency. The lighting, perhaps." "No, it's fine. It can wait. I want to be present with you," she said, parroting a line from her therapy sessions. But she wasn't present. She was ghosting him while sitting 3 feet away. Daniel looked at his wife, the woman who had given away their wedding song, and felt something cold settle in his heart. The anger was fading, replaced by a terrifying clarity. He wasn't fighting for her anymore. He was just waiting for her to make a mistake he could use. "I'm going to be working late next week," Daniel said casually. "We have a new project launching. Just a heads up." Elena nodded, relieved to have more time unaccounted for. "Okay. Thanks for telling me. Be sure to take care of yourself, Daniel." The phone vibrated again. This time, Daniel didn't flinch. He just took another bite of his dinner, tasting nothing. The architectural firm of Sterling and Vance was quiet at 8:00 p.m. The open-plan office, usually a hive of ringing phones and clicking mouses, was reduced to a landscape of shadows and glowing emergency exit signs. Daniel sat in his glass-walled office, the blueprints for the West Loop project spread out before him, but his eyes were fixed on the city skyline beyond the window. He checked his phone. No messages. Elena was at a gallery networking event tonight. Julian would be there. She hadn't said it explicitly, but the omission was loud enough to hear. In the past, Daniel would have been halfway home by now, picking up takeout, warming plates, ensuring the environment was welcoming for her return. He had spent years curating a safe harbor for a woman who was increasingly sailing toward a storm. "You're still here?" The voice startled him. Daniel turned to see Nora standing in his doorway. She was the firm's lead landscape architect, sharp, pragmatic, with a dry wit that cut through corporate jargon. She wore a heavy wool coat, a scarf loosely draped around her neck, and held a helmet under her arm. She rode a Ducati, a detail Daniel had always admired for its terrifying efficiency. "Just finishing up some elevations," Daniel said, rubbing his temples. "You?" "Drafting the green roof specs," Nora said, leaning against the doorframe. My eyes started crossing, so I called it. "I'm heading to the aviary for a drink and some actual food. You look like you could use one." Daniel's automatic reflex was to decline. "I have to get home. Elena might call. I need to walk the dog." The excuses lined up in his throat, ready to be fired. But then he remembered the playlist. "The Night We Met." He remembered the clove cigarettes. He remembered the word mature. If maturity meant allowing your partner space, surely it also meant occupying your own. "Give me 2 minutes," Daniel said, closing his laptop with a decisive snap. Nora raised an eyebrow, surprised. "All right, Vance. Don't hurt yourself rushing." The bar was dim, loud, and smelled of gin and expensive cologne. It was a place for people who didn't want to go home yet. They found a booth in the back. Nora ordered a bourbon, neat. Daniel did the same. For the first hour, they talked about work. It was a relief to discuss structural loads and soil depth, problems with concrete solutions, issues that could be solved with math rather than emotional gymnastics. Nora was direct. She didn't speak in riddles. She didn't use therapy speak to mask selfishness. "You seem different tonight," Nora observed, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. She wasn't flirting. She was analyzing. It was her job to notice subtle shifts in the landscape. Different good or different bad? Different, untethered, she said. Usually you check your phone every 15 minutes. You haven't looked at it once. Daniel reached into his pocket. The phone felt heavy, like a stone. He pulled it out and set it on the table, face up. 8:45 p.m. One text from Elena, sent 20 minutes ago. Event is dragging on. Might go for a late bite with the artists. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. The permission slip she always signed for herself. Daniel looked at the screen, then at Nora. A slow, cold anger uncoiled in his chest. But this time, it didn't paralyze him. It fueled him. "I'm not waiting up," Daniel murmured. "Sorry?" Nora asked. "Nothing," Daniel said. He signaled the server. "Another round? And let's order food. I'm not in a rush." Nora smiled, a genuine, crooked expression. "Now you're speaking my language." They stayed until 11 o'clock p.m. Daniel laughed, a real laugh, rusty from disuse, at a story Nora told about a contractor falling into a decorative pond. For the first time in months, he wasn't Daniel the husband, the rock, the doormat. He was just a man drinking bourbon in a warm bar, existing outside the orbit of Elena's moods. When he finally walked into the penthouse, it was nearly midnight. The apartment was dark. Elena was home. Her coat was thrown over the chaise lounge. Her heels kicked off in the hallway. Daniel walked into the bedroom. The lamp on the bedside table was on. Elena was sitting up in bed, a book open on her lap. But she wasn't reading. She was staring at the door. She looked at the clock, then at him. Her expression was a mix of confusion and irritation. She wasn't used to him coming home after her. She wasn't used to the smell of bourbon and cold wind clinging to him. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice tight. "I've been home for an hour." Daniel loosened his tie, walking past her to the closet. He didn't stop to reassure her. He didn't apologize. He began to unbutton his shirt, his movements calm and deliberate. "I went out for a drink with a colleague," he said simply. "A colleague? Who? You didn't text me." Daniel turned to face her. He saw the flicker of anxiety in her eyes, the sudden loss of control. He kept his face perfectly neutral, holding her gaze just long enough to make it uncomfortable. "I didn't think I needed to," Daniel said, his voice smooth, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "I assumed we were being mature about our autonomy, Elena." He saw the shock register on her face as he turned his back to her and walked into the bathroom, shutting the door firmly between them. The balance of power in a marriage is like atmospheric pressure. You rarely notice it until it drops, and your ears pop. For 5 years, the pressure in the Vance household had been regulated entirely by Elena. Daniel absorbed the fluctuations, adjusted his own volume, and kept the climate stable. But in the week following his late-night return, the barometer had broken. It was Friday evening. The Chicago wind was howling against the glass, a low, mournful sound that filled the apartment. Daniel stood in the walk-in closet, adjusting the cuffs of a charcoal suit he hadn't worn in months. It was sharper, more fitted than his usual office attire. He sprayed a touch of sandalwood cologne, something he usually skipped. Behind him, Elena sat on the velvet ottoman in the center of the closet, watching him. She was dressed in loungewear, a glass of wine balanced on her knee. She had been watching him for 10 minutes, her silence growing heavier with every button he fastened. "You're going out again," she said finally. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in observation. Daniel checked his reflection in the full-length mirror. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. Yes, firm dinner. We're celebrating the West Loop contract. Is Nora going to be there? The name hung in the air, sharp and sudden. Elena had clearly done her research. She must have checked the firm's website or scrolled through LinkedIn. The thought of her digging for information gave Daniel a grim sense of satisfaction. He turned slowly to face her. Nora is the lead landscape architect on the project. So yes, she'll be there, along with 6 other partners. Elena swirled her wine, her eyes narrowing slightly. You've mentioned her 3 times this week. You never talk about your colleagues that much. I didn't realize you were counting, Daniel said, his voice mild. He walked over to the accessory island and selected a watch. I thought you liked that I was engaging more with my work, finding my own spark. Elena stood up, the movement abrupt. She walked over to him, stopping just inside his personal space. She smelled of lavender bath salts and the Chardonnay she'd been nursing. It feels different, Daniel, she said, her voice dropping to a register that was usually meant to evoke guilt. You're distant. You come home, you go to bed, you leave early. I feel like I'm living with a roommate. It's triggering my abandonment issues. There it was, the therapy card. In the past, this would have been the moment Daniel dropped everything. He would have canceled his plans, ordered takeout, and spent the night reassuring her that she was the center of his universe. Daniel looked at her. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, but he also saw the manipulation. She wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing control of him. He picked up his phone and checked the time. I hear you, Daniel said, using the validation technique she often preached. I understand you're feeling anxious, but I think you're projecting a bit, Elena. I'm just exercising the same autonomy you asked for. Elena flinched as if he had slapped her. That's not fair. I was talking about healing from a past trauma. You're just staying out late to punish me. I'm not punishing you, Daniel said, stepping past her toward the door. I'm living my life. You have Julian and your art. I have my career and my colleagues. It's healthy. It's mature. He stopped at the doorway and looked back. She looked small standing there in the expansive closet, surrounded by rows of designer shoes and handbags. For the first time, he noticed how much space she took up in their life and how little room she had left for him. Don't wait up, he added softly. Daniel, stop, Elena said, her voice rising, cracking with frustration. You're acting like a stranger. Are you sleeping with her? The question was desperate, crude. It was beneath her, or at least beneath the version of herself she presented to the world. Daniel paused. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He could deny it instantly. He could tell her the truth, that Nora was just a friend, that he was faithful to a fault. But why give her that comfort? Why soothe her anxiety when she had spent weeks feeding his? He smiled, a sad, unreadable smile. That's a very insecure question, Elena, he said. I think you need to sit with that feeling and ask yourself where it's coming from. We can talk about it when I get back. Be the bigger person. He turned and walked down the hallway. He heard her gasp, a sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of her wine glass shattering against the floor. He didn't stop. He didn't turn back. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. His hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally cutting the strings. Sunday afternoons in the Vance household used to be sacred, a time for reading, slow jazz, and the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between two people who know each other's rhythms. But the silence that filled the penthouse now was different. It was the silence of a crime scene before the tape is put up. Elena was in the bath. Daniel could hear the faint rush of water through the pipes and the muffled sound of her voice humming. She was happy. Since Friday night, she had been walking on eggshells around him, alternating between aggressive affection and watchful anxiety. She sensed the shift in him, but she couldn't interpret it. Daniel sat in the living room, a laptop open on his knees, ostensibly working. His eyes, however, drifted to the fuel canvas tote bag Elena had left on the entryway bench. It was her gallery bag, usually filled with catalogs and invoices. Today, it sat slumped over, heavy with something rigid. He stood up, the movement silent on the plush rug. He didn't know why he walked toward it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the fact that she had hurriedly kicked it aside when she came in, rather than hanging it up. He reached into the bag. His fingers brushed against the rough texture of a spiral-bound book. A sketchbook. Daniel pulled it out. It was a moleskin, the black cover worn at the edges. He knew, instantly, that this didn't belong to Elena. She dealt in finished products, in framed perfection. This was a tool of creation. He opened it. The first few pages were erratic, sketches of city streets, coffee cups, the harsh angles of the L-train structure. Julian's style was chaotic, aggressive. Daniel turned the page and the air left his lungs. The chaos vanished. The strokes became tender, soft, reverent. It was a charcoal sketch of a woman sleeping. Her hair was splayed across a pillow, her mouth slightly parted, one hand tucked under her cheek. It was Elena. Daniel stared at the image, his heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He knew that pose. He knew the way her shoulder curved when she was in a deep sleep. He knew the vulnerability of that expression because he had watched it for 5 years. He turned the page. Elena again. This time sitting in a window seat, wearing nothing but a sheet, holding a mug. The caption scrawled at the bottom read, Sunday morning, the light returns. The date was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, Elena had told him she was at a brunch with the girls. This wasn't just sex. Sex would have been easier. Sex was a transaction of bodies. This was intimacy. This was Julian studying the curves of Daniel's wife with the possessive eye of an artist who believes he understands the subject better than anyone else. It was a reclaiming. Julian was documenting his theft. Daniel felt a strange sensation wash over him. It wasn't rage. The rage had burned itself out days ago. This was something colder, harder. It was the feeling of a contract being voided. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His hand was steady now. He took high-resolution photos of the sketches, the sleeping one, the window seat, the dates. He flipped to the back, finding a sketch of them holding hands, fingers interlaced. He photographed that too. He closed the book and slid it back into the tote bag, positioning it exactly as it had been, the corner of the cover catching on the canvas fabric just so. He walked back to the sofa and sat down. He didn't pick up his work laptop. Instead, he opened a private browser window on his phone. He typed in a name he had been given by a senior partner at his firm months ago, a recommendation he had hoped never to use. Catherine Sterling, Family Law. He composed a short email, Subject, Inquiry, Losh Vance. Body, I need to schedule a consultation immediately. Asset division and marital dissolution. There is significant complexity regarding property. I have documentation. Please advise on the earliest availability. He hit send. The sound of the water turning off in the bathroom echoed through the hall. Minutes later, Elena emerged, wrapped in a plush white robe, her hair wrapped in a towel. Her skin was pink and scrubbed clean. She looked innocent. "Did you get any work done?" she asked, walking over to him and leaning down to kiss the top of his head. She smelled of eucalyptus and steam. Daniel didn't pull away, but he didn't lean into it. He kept his eyes on the blank screen of his laptop. "A little," Daniel said. "Just clearing out some old files, organizing the archives." "That sounds boring," she laughed softly, walking toward the kitchen. "I'm going to make tea. Do you want some?" "No," Daniel said. He looked at her back, watching her move through the kitchen of the home she thought she still controlled. "I'm good." He watched her walk past the tote bag. She didn't even look at it. She was so confident in her deception, so sure that he was the safe husband who would never snoop, never suspect, never leave. Daniel closed his laptop. The screen went black, reflecting his own face, hard, unrecognizable, and finally awake. The gallery in River North was a white box of pretension, filled with people who equated suffering with depth, provided the suffering was framed nicely and cost 5 figures. The air conditioner hummed a low, expensive note, battling the body heat of Chicago's cultural elite. Daniel moved through the crowd with the fluidity of a shark in shallow water. He wore a tuxedo, a choice that was slightly too formal for the event, yet somehow made everyone else look underdressed. Beside him, Elena was vibrating with a frequency that threatened to shatter her champagne flute. "You're quiet," she whispered, her hand gripping his bicep tight enough to bruise. She was wearing a backless silk dress that she had bought specifically for this night, for Julian. "I'm observing," Daniel said, taking a sip of the lukewarm gallery wine. "It's a big night for him. I want to be respectful." Elena scanned his face, looking for the sarcasm, but Daniel's expression was smooth, polished marble. She relaxed slightly, though her eyes kept darting toward the back of the room where Julian was holding court. "He's over there," she said. "We should say hello. Get it over with." "Get what over with?" Daniel asked, turning to her. "I thought we were here to celebrate closure." He didn't wait for her answer. He guided her through the throng of black turtlenecks and architectural eyewear. As they approached, the crowd parted. Julian stood near the centerpiece of the collection, the series of charcoal sketches Daniel had seen in the book. They were framed now, matted in stark white, titled simply, "The Muse in Repose." Julian looked the part of the tortured artist. Unkempt hair, a suit that didn't quite fit, a cigarette tucked behind his ear, despite the strict no-smoking policy. When he saw Elena, his face lit up with a possessive pride. When he saw Daniel, the light flickered and died, replaced by a guarded smirk. "The happy couple," Julian said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby collectors. "I didn't think you'd make it, Daniel. Architecture is such a demanding field." "I wouldn't miss it," Daniel said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, dry, and brief. "Elena has told me so much about the process behind these pieces. She's very invested in your success." Elena stiffened. Julian chuckled, shifting his weight. "Well, inspiration strikes where it strikes. It's about capturing a moment of vulnerability, a moment of truth. Truth, Daniel repeated, testing the word like a coin he suspected was counterfeit. He stepped closer to the largest sketch, the one of Elena sleeping in the window seat. He studied it with the intensity of a critic. The crowd around them hushed, sensing the friction. A husband analyzing a portrait of his wife drawn by her ex-lover. It was the kind of drama they lived for. "The shading on the shoulder is exquisite," Daniel said softly. "You really captured the way the morning light hits that specific corner of the bedroom. It's a very private angle." Julian's smirk faltered. "I work from memory sometimes. And imagination." "Of course," Daniel said, turning to look Julian dead in the eye. "But the date on the caption, February 14th, that wasn't memory, was it? That was the Sunday Elena told me she was having brunch with her mother." The silence that fell over the circle was absolute. Elena let out a small, strangled sound. Julian looked at her, then back at Daniel, his arrogance draining away to reveal the panic of a child caught stealing. "Daniel, don't," Elena hissed, her face draining of color. "Don't what?" Daniel asked, his voice calm, conversational. He looked around at the listening crowd, then back at his wife. "I'm not angry, Elena. I'm impressed. You asked me to be mature about your need for connection. You asked for autonomy." He turned back to Julian. "It takes a lot of maturity to share your wife with the world like this, to let another man document the intimacy you used to think was yours." Daniel reached into his tuxedo jacket. Elena flinched, expecting a weapon or divorce papers. Instead, Daniel pulled out a red sticker, the gallery code for sold. He stepped forward and pressed the red dot onto the glass of the sleeping portrait. "I'll take this one," Daniel said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "It seems only right. I paid for the apartment it was drawn in. I might as well own the documentation of what happened there." He turned to Elena, who was trembling, tears welling in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer, crushing humiliation of being stripped of her secrets in front of the people she wanted to impress. "Enjoy the rest of the night," Daniel said to her. "I think I've seen enough art for one lifetime." He didn't stomp out. He didn't slam the door. He walked away slowly, nodding to a colleague he recognized near the bar, leaving Elena standing next to her lover and the evidence of her betrayal, exposed under the unforgiving gallery lights. The ride up to the 42nd floor was silent, but the noise inside Elena's head was deafening. She had left the gallery 10 minutes after Daniel, enduring the whispers, the pitying glances, and Julian's pathetic attempt to laugh it off as performance art. She burst through the front door of the penthouse, ready for the fight. She was ready for the yelling, the accusations, the broken plates. She knew how to win those fights. She would cry, she would talk about her childhood trauma. She would make him feel small for not understanding her complexity. But the apartment was quiet. "Daniel?" she called out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She found him in the master bedroom. The lights were dimmed. On the bed, there were no suitcases thrown open in a rage. There was just one neat leather weekender bag, zipped and sitting by the door. Daniel was standing by the dresser, placing his watch, the Patek Philippe she had bought him for their engagement, into its velvet box. He snapped the lid shut with a soft click. "You left me there," Elena said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and shock. She walked into the room, tossing her clutch onto the bed. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, Julian's investors, my colleagues. Do you have any idea what you've done? Daniel turned. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and tie. He looked comfortable, relieved even. I didn't do anything, Elena, he said. I just bought a piece of art. I supported your friend. You know what you did? She screamed, the facade of the cool, detached art curator finally cracking. You made it look like I was cheating on you. Weren't you? The question was asked without malice. It was just a query for the record. Elena faltered. It wasn't physical, Daniel. I never slept with him. I told you that. I respected our vows. Daniel picked up the leather bag. He swung it over his shoulder, the weight of it seeming to ground him. That's the problem, he said, walking toward her, stopping just outside of arm's reach. You think the only way to betray someone is with your body. But you gave him everything else. You gave him your respect. You gave him your patience. You gave him our history. He looked around the bedroom, the silk sheets, the heavy curtains, the life they had curated to look perfect from the outside. I've been thinking about what you said, about maturity, Daniel continued. You were right. I was being childish. I was holding on to this idea that marriage meant possession, that it meant I was entitled to your loyalty. I am loyal, Elena cried, tears finally spilling over, hot and real. She reached for his hand, but he didn't recoil. He simply didn't react. His hand remained limp in hers, a dead weight. No, Daniel said gently, pulling his hand away. You're not. And that's okay. You need to be who you are. You need the chaos. You need the fire that Julian gives you. I can't be the dampener on that anymore. He walked to the bedroom door. Where are you going? Elena asked, panic rising in her chest. She had never seen him like this. She had seen him angry, sad, frustrated, but she had never seen him done. The Drake, Daniel said. I have a suite for the week. The lawyers will contact you on Monday regarding the separation. I've asked them to be mature about the asset division. Daniel, please, she sobbed, rushing to block the doorway. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll stop seeing him. I promise. I'll burn the sketches. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, for the last time. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he knew it wasn't fear of losing him. It was the fear of having to face herself without him there, to blame for her unhappiness. You don't need to burn them, Daniel said. I own them now. They're safe. He stepped around her. It was effortless. She was no longer an obstacle. She was just furniture. He walked down the long hallway, past the kitchen where he had waited for her so many nights, past the spot where he had realized he was alone. Daniel! She screamed from the bedroom, her voice breaking. If you walk out that door, I won't take you back. It was her final gambit. The ultimatum. Daniel paused with his hand on the brass handle of the front door. He looked at the reflection of the empty hallway in the entryway mirror. I know, he said softly. He opened the door. The cold air of the hallway rushed in. He stepped out and pulled the door shut behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound the penthouse had ever heard. Inside, Elena stood in the silence, the echo of the door closing, settling around her like dust. She was finally alone with her first love, her freedom, and the terrible, suffocating weight of getting exactly what she wanted.